is the Skechers Razor. It's a speed boot and it's actually also quite a lot better than you might think. But is it good enough to really go head-to-head with all the other big players in the speed market? Well, in today's video, I'll tell you what's good about the boot and also not so good to hopefully help you decide if you should cop or drop. Because as always, I'm JayMike and this is my review of the Skechers Razor. Going into the speed boot market is always tough. I mean, the alternatives are pretty good, so you'll need a really great product if you want to make an impression. And Skechers' way of doing that seems to have been to build a really solid speed boot, but then also have comfort as a key element. Now, it features this synthetic forefoot, which I'll get back to in a second. Then it has a fit knit tongue and collar and a mesh midfoot. And it strikes me as being pretty well, put together and well thought out in all its components. But what really stands out to me is the forefoot material here, which seems to be some sort of Teijin OLM variation. At least it immediately made me think of the Teijin on the Vapor 10. In the way that it feels, the softness, the way it moves in hand, even down to the little micro texturing on top of the material itself. And given the fact that back in the day, Nike just bought the synthetic from Teijin, I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same or at least very close to being the same. Which is not a bad thing because the Vapor 10s were awesome. So basically it's this super thin, very soft synthetic that it's really soft and pliable out of the box. But the beautiful thing is that it only gets softer as you break it in. It becomes really pliable and I don't want to call it mushy, but it's just very supple and soft and takes immediately to the shape of your foot. And what I really like is that it manages to bend almost naturally with the foot, but without crumbling up and giving these almost hard pressure points like other synthetic uppers do. And to be fair, I think it's one of the more comfortable synthetic uppers out there at the moment. And I'm not really sure if it is actually the same Teijin OLM as we see on the Vapor 10, but giving me those Vapor 10 throwback vibes is good enough for me. That's a solid choice. But it's not all about this though, because the rest of the upper, to be fair, also behaves relatively well. So you have the mesh midfoot here, which offers you a pretty snug fit, even on my relatively slim foot, and gives you a sensation of a pretty solid stability and lockdown without ever being too aggressive or too squeezing around your foot. Then there's the fit knit collar, which, it fits like most other knitted collars, but it's pretty it feels like a high quality, rich and pretty premium knit. And then there's also the heel, which is a bit of an interesting one because the heel counter has a nice shape to it. It's got a good depth, so it feels like the foot falls nicely into place and you get, I would say, sufficient hold, but without it ever obstructing the comfort levels. So it doesn't feel like the boot is just squeezing your heel to hold it in place at all costs. But it does enough. Of course, you've then got a trade-off of it's not that super hardcore speed lock-in that you want, but on the other hand, it's pretty comfortable. And it does enough. But like I mentioned before, it feels like Skechers really had a big focus on comfort here. So just like on the SKX, the shape of the toe box is, I don't want to call it square, but it's definitely a little bit wider and more anatomical and you can say foot-shaped than most other boots out there, which means that you do get a slightly more natural and, just a bit more wiggle room for your toes. A bit more of a free, easygoing sensation. And I'm not gonna lie, from a comfort point of view, it feels pretty good. Now, size-wise, I went with my usual size US 7 and it was spot on, very good. And width-wise, it's definitely on the wider side, so I reckon that it will accommodate wider feet pretty well. And also for my relatively narrow foot, it didn't feel overly loose or baggy or anything, so I'm also pretty happy with that. True to size is the way to go. So it fits well and is decently light, that's a pretty good start. And on the ball, the Razor isn't too shabby either. And I'm gonna have to whip out the Vapor 10 comparisons again here. It's not a bad thing, don't get me wrong, but it does feel very 2014 Vapor-esque, where you get this really thin and very barefoot one-to-one feel on the ball, but with that hint of softness to the touch as well, to the point where you just you feel pretty connected to the ball in a very nice way. Also, you have this micro texturing on top that adds a little bit of grip where it feels sticky, but in a matte way, so it's not completely taking over and taking up mental space, but instead leaves me with a bit of a balance, so I feel that I have confidence enough on the ball to just focus on everything else, which, Lord knows, I need when I'm on the ball. Will it turn you into a dribbling god then? Well, no, but it does enough. Now, as for shooting, again, you guessed it, Vapor 10 vibes here, but you get a very firm and almost pingy sensation when you strike the ball, to the point where it feels very one-to-one and honest when you go and shoot. And to be completely honest, guys, if you blindfolded me and slapped a Razor on one foot and a Vapor 10 on the other, from a pure touch point of view, I probably couldn't tell that much of a difference. It's a good thing, but, oh.
As for the outsole, Skechers have gone for speed, with an aggressive set of chevron bladed studs and a carbon fiber insert in the heel for stability and responsiveness.
And these things do feel pretty speedy. So the chevron-shaped studs here offer actually a great amount of bite, both when you accelerate in linear directions, but also when you change direction. I mean, there's always an aggressive sort of traction in the ground, and it feels really good. But it also feels very, very similar to the Vapor 14 in terms of the shape and configuration, which is probably not a coincidence, because one of the key people working on the Vapor 14 now works for Skechers. But regardless, the stud shape and configuration is elite on the Razor. Now, the rest of the outsole also does pretty good. It feels nice and stable, especially in the midfoot and the heel, and moves and responds relatively well with the movements of your foot. Except for me at least, in one area, which also leads me to 4 annoying things that you need to know about. Because as good as the rest of the outsole might be, the forefoot, especially around this area, is very soft and flexible and bendy, which is nice and free and comfortable and all, but personally at least, I didn't get the snapback and the level of springiness and solidity that I'm looking for in a speed boot. So, freedom cool, but speed. And if we stay on that note, the shape of the toe box for me is, don't get me wrong, I think it's genuinely very comfortable, but the Razor is a speed boot, and to me at least, it does feel a little less nimble and speed boot-like compared to competitors out there. So just like on the SKX, I would probably be okay with sacrificing a bit of that anatomical correctness to get a slightly pointier and tighter fit and make it a bit more speed boot focused. Now, obviously, if you have problems normally with boots squeezing your toes, just completely disregard everything I said in this point. And then there is the knitted collar here, which I don't really know if you can see it on camera, but it kind of ends with curving a bit in. A lot like on the Vapor 14, by the way. And while it's definitely not a major thing, personally, I just don't think it fits as well or seamlessly and doesn't offer quite the same smooth transition from boot to foot as it does when the knit is just flat and straight. Minor thing. And finally, press repeat, there's the price. Look, I actually think that the Skechers Razor is a very good boot. And I do think that from a quality, performance, fit point of view, 225 euros is a fair price for the boot that you get, because it is genuinely very good. But where I worry a bit that Skechers might face a challenge is the price too high to convince players out there to try the Razor instead of a Furon or a Mizuno Alpha Elite at similar or even lower prices? And that's kind of the thing. Just like the SKX, I actually think that Skechers could have made a big splash, a big impact on the market with the Razor, but I think for people to be really convinced to take the plunge and try the boot, which is where the magic happens, and they finally realize this is great, in my book, the price should have been lower to really make it a good deal for people to try it. Make it worth it, Skechers.
And just like on the SKX, that, for me, would be the most interesting challenge for the Razor.
It is a good boot that feels a bit like a combination between a Vapor 10 and a Vapor 14 with a bit more focus on comfort and slightly more width to play with. And sure, it has its flaws, but I wouldn't mind wearing it myself. And I think quality-wise, it definitely deserves at least a look in, a fair shot against all of the other good speed boots out there. Is it the best? Not necessarily, but I reckon that it stands a fighting chance. But what about you? Would you give it a go? Well, if your answer is yes, you can find the link to the Razor on Unisport right over there. And then, of course, before you go, remember to tell me what you think of the boot in the comment section right down below. And also, if you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to the channel with the notifications on. And with those words, the Razor and I will be signing off. Cheerio!